Start away. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We at Indigrow are extremely excited to host our very, very esteemed participants to discuss cancel culture in children's literature in today's day and age. So today we have Simone Morris, a very, very prominent diversity and inclusion leader, and also the CEO of Simone Enterprises, all the way from Connecticut, I believe. And we also have Denise Tan from Singapore, who is a children's literary expert and also the founder of the very popular Closetful of Books. And from India, we have Atla Das Bla, who's the co-founder of Indigrow and also an early childhood expert. So I think it's a great mix to have a conversation about this. So maybe let me kick off with you, Simone. Do you feel this conversation of diversity and inclusion has evolved in the past 2 years, not just in the world in general, but also with regards to children and education and parenting?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot has happened in the last 2 years. I mean, we've had cataclysmic moments that has caused the entire world to just pause and take note, and that includes children. I'm noticing a lot more educational efforts, conversations. In fact, my co-host Julie Kratz and I started Inclusion School because we were like, there's nothing to talk to children about inclusion. And now all of a sudden there's a lot of conversations going on that are looking at starting very young to have those courageous conversations. So I would say a lot has happened in 2 years, and yes, children are a focus right now as well.
Okay, that's great. Denise, do you see sort of a similar thread with regards to maybe children's literature and parenting in Asia?
Well, I think the education system in Singapore works very hard to be diverse and celebrating of how diverse our different cultures are. So that has been going on for a really long time. Of course, there are arguments to be made about the efficacy of those efforts, but the efforts have always been there. Also, but the thing is, we import a lot of our literature. So we take a lot of our literature from Australia, UK, and US, although that's increasingly changing. But because we've always taken our literature from these three big Western countries, the texts that we can offer to children have not always been diverse. They do not match the efforts made in schools or the lives that the children live at home in our HDB flats, where we have all the different races living together. So the literature has not necessarily matched the efforts. That is really changing in the last 2 years, as Simone said, and it has changed really drastically in the past few months. I think with the grown-ups being more awake and being more equipped, and they feel the urgency to give their children the vocabulary and the skills to discuss the issues. So the literature has changed in the past few years. I think the awareness of the big 5 publishers is also quite startling. Like publishers like HarperCollins and Candlewick, they have started an Own Voices publishing arm, publishing imprint. I think they are more aware of how they can tell these stories. So that has been a really good change to see.
Okay, thank you. Akina, maybe let me switch to you and ask you a slightly different perspective from an early childhood expert. Do you see experiences of where you feel there's more need to introduce this earlier and earlier? Have you had any experiences personally where children and parents need to be made aware, not at 10, 12, but maybe at like 2, 3?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, research shows us that children as young as 2 years of age start to notice cultural differences or ethnic differences, in their communities. And what happens is that children are very impressionable, right? They're constantly absorbing by what they see around them, and that becomes their reality. That's what they see. And what happens is that when we kind of present only a certain perspective of the world to them, then that is the only perspective that they know. So there is a danger of raising a child with single story. You want to be able to represent the world to them and represent all aspects of the world to them from an early age, because the sooner you start doing that, the more open, the more accepting of differences that they grow up with.
Okay. Let me maybe jump a little bit more into the crux of the topic of today. So I want each of you guys to maybe tell me your favorite book from your childhood, and if you'd recommend that to younglings of today. Would you read them to youngsters of today? Maybe Yatra, I'll start with you.
So, given a bit of our colonial history, and we kind of grew up with Enid Blyton, right? So for us, Enid Blyton was one of my favorite authors, and my favorite book was The Faraway Tree. And I think that all my three children have read Faraway Tree. It was probably the first novel, the whole novel that they kind of grew up reading. And I would definitely recommend it. To kids. I think the idea of magic and pixies and fairies and little secret gardens, with picnics outside, these are all lovely things for a child to grow up with. Having said that, I do feel that at the point in time that I grew up, there was underrepresentation of the kind of life like Denise was talking about that represented me. So I would mix it up a bit at this point.
Okay, Simone, what about you? Your favorite childhood book? And if you would repeat that to today's generation.
Oh, I was thinking about that question and just thinking that, I don't recall. I grew up in Jamaica and I don't recall a heavy focus on reading, so much so that it's impactful, where I would say right now to my daughter, let's read this book from me growing up. So I'm having an opportunity to rewrite or relive my childhood through my daughter, who is 5 right now. And what an opportunity it is, because of the work that I do. I am more intentional about book selection. And so books like I Am Enough, just to reinforce the strength and empowerment, women's empowerment to her at 5. So I don't recall the books that I read in Jamaica many, many moons ago. I just don't. But right now, I come across a lot of books in different categories across the diversity dimension. So it's a huge opportunity for me.
So how are you bringing nostalgia into raising your child? So are you missing it? Is it something that's important for you, or are you infusing it through other elements?
Well, I just feel that I was born in Jamaica and I was there until about elementary school, and so I primarily grew up in the United States. I feel so, I am more immersed in American culture than Jamaican culture, but there is a strong theme of Caribbean culture in our household, where the foods that we introduce her to, my mom still has the accent, we're including that Caribbean heritage, maybe not so much from a literature standpoint, but from a cultural awareness and celebration. And the music will make a Pandora channel and just introduce her to that. So she was born to Bob Marley, everything will be okay in the delivery room. So, she's getting aware of that culture as well.
Okay, thanks. Denise, what about you? Favorite books when you were growing up, and anything that you recommend or not recommend?
Well, like Akila, I grew up with lots of the Enid Blyton stories. I love those, right? I also think that when I was growing up I was born in 1988, so I was growing up in the 90s. There wasn't very much to choose from. It was Enid Blyton, Sweet Valley, Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, right? And I've got a really funny story about the Enid Blyton book. So I have certain authors that I work with, and they grew up with Enid Blyton stories also. So they are Singaporean authors. And they were saying that, and this particular lady was saying that when she was reading the Enid Blyton stories, and then there's a lot of description about food, right? And it's all about ham sandwiches. we don't eat very many ham sandwiches in Singapore. And she's a Malay author, so she definitely does not eat ham sandwiches. So she didn't know what they were. So she thought ham sandwiches were sandwiches made out of hamsters.
Oh, that's a very interesting story.
And so that's the background that we grew up with, right? We had assimilated into that culture and assumed that that was the way it was, and we've read it as fantasy. I would still recommend the Enid Blyton stories to the children or to the kids that I work with, but I will also recommend conversations about them, about the agency of women characters in her story, about representation, and even about perception. And I knew we were going to talk about Enid Blyton. We cannot avoid her. And there's actually a issue of her books, right? So it's under the Enid Blyton estate, using the same characters and same formula, but it's written by authors of today.
Okay.
So they're retold new stories, same characters, same kind of style, but I think they are so much more contemporary. They make so much more sense to the kids. I love reliving my childhood through reading these new versions, and I also can't wait to introduce them to the kids.
That's lovely. Is it a reissue of just Secret Seven or a whole bunch of other Enid Blyton titles?
So the Secret Seven is the first two. There are two books that have been re-released. And then they are moving on to take on the other titles as well. I think there are some things that they cannot change, but I think like with Secret Seven and Famous Five, the characters can go on more adventures. And that's fine because we're not changing the text and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you another interesting question that sort of we came about, I think about a month and a bit ago. So it was Dr. Seuss' birthday, and my son is 3. So we've had Dr. Seuss for a while on our bookshelf, and it was only until recently that spark went off in my head as well. It's like, how much should I do this and how much is okay? But to be honest, if you look at the Lorax, it's about there's an opportunity for climate change conversations. You look at Horton Hears Who, with that could be about talking about unheard voices. So I think there is something to be said about me as a mum, sort of feeling a bit guilty, to be honest, hearing all the conversations around and sort of saying, oh, should I not be having Dr. Seuss? Should I not be? It's not the only one, obviously, that we raise Neil with, but there was a little bit of me that sort of went, oh, maybe I'm starting to feel guilty about having 10 Dr. Seuss on my bookshelf. So that's kind of like one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about. Simone, what do you think about that? Should mums feel guilty for having Dr. Seuss on their bookshelf?
No, mom shouldn't feel guilty because you use the data that you have at the time. So don't chastise yourself for what is uncovered now that you become aware of and you run and take all Dr. Seuss off your shelf. I think, if you think about Barbie, they had a challenge around diversity of the dolls and they made a switch, and that didn't mean that everybody went and said, all the, one skin color or one ethnicity, let me get rid of all those dolls. What they tried to do is, okay, let me start to diversify selection and what I'm introducing my child to. So, Disney has issues with the movies. What do we all know? We're not watching Disney. Our kids would go mad. So, I don't think you can erase history based on what's uncovered now. You do better because you know better and you are more informed going forward. But I think it's a challenge to just say, wow, let me be educated enough to know what Dr. Seuss book, okay, this one, no. And then, not having the education and awareness, the lens to look at to know what to take out and what to keep and how to have the conversation. So, give yourself, I would say, parents, give yourself grace. Don't beat yourself up, moms. You do your best. It's hard enough being a parent with all the responsibilities we have, and you make more informed decisions and you educate your children and you bring one at a time, you books in, you listen to podcasts, you build your awareness so you can build your child's awareness.
And thank you. That's actually a very balanced view of looking at it. Certainly makes me feel better. And Denise, obviously you're a founder of Closetful of Books, very popular in Singapore. Are you very conscious and intentional about, obviously you are, about the kind of books that you stock, but Dr. Seuss, for example, or any other title which has come under the limelight recently? Is it something that you continue to keep, or is it something that you encourage parents to pick up, or the opposite?
Well, before I answer your question, I need to echo Simone to say that parents should never feel guilty for reading to their children. You use what you know at the moment, and if you're reading to your child, that is you are equipping your child to have conversations with you later on. So one should never feel guilty about that. In terms of selection, because we are a tiny bookstore, I have the luxury of curating my collection. I don't have to stock in the first place titles like Dr. Seuss or Eric Carle or Michael Rosen or Julia Donaldson. I don't have to, because these are titles that parents already know and they can seek it out from my friends Amazon and the Book Depository. So they don't have to come to me for that. Our customers come to us for titles that are different, that they can't find elsewhere, and that's not Dr. Seuss or any of these titles. There is another conversation to be had about stocking titles that are deemed problematic. So you have novels such as books by David Walliams that have been challenged. I think it's, as I said, I have the luxury of deciding what I want to stock. And my stance is generally, if I do separate the art and the artist, because I think if the artist is problematic, we must trust the grown-up and the child to have the conversation. If the text is problematic, I do not stock it. So with David Walliams' books where the stories are really sexist, ageist, and sometimes quite offensive, then I don't stock those titles.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the general stance that I take. I should also show you this book. It's called Was the Cat in the Hat Black? That's written by Philip Nell. So it's actually not just about the Dr. Seuss books, but all the other books in children's literature that can be viewed through a racist lens, and the conversations that grown-ups can have. So it's a really useful book to have. It is very focused on American culture. I do hope there's one that's focused on Asia. This is more of an American lens, but it's a good springboard to have conversations with.
Thank you for that little tip. We'll definitely be picking that up. Akhila, let me switch to you as a segue to what Denise said. So from a parent point of view and from an early childhood point of view, how would you, maybe like 3 or 4 tips or a process that parents could follow on building their bookshelves? It's like, how do you go about this in the day and age that we live in the day and age of diversity and inclusion being foremost in children's literature, and if they even think about that. So what should parents think of as they're building their bookshelves?
Before I answer that, I just wanted to add on to what Simone and Denise were saying, that one thing is that even, as parents, even if you do have what we perceive to be problematic books on our bookshelf, because at that particular point in time we didn't know any better, I think that by blindsiding those conversations or not engaging upon those conversations, as parents we run a risk of not creating a learning opportunity, or not helping our children understand where problems lie. And I think that if we happen to be in a situation where it allows us to have a conversation, I think that is something that we should, as parents, take advantage of. Simply put, things like Disney, when you're looking at Sleeping Beauty, right? I mean, for me, it's a beautiful conversation to have around consent, and it's just something that comes up because your child is going to interact, whether you bring it home or whether he goes to somebody else's house and watches the movie there, right? So it's a good conversation to have. Having said that, in terms of how do I go about expanding my child's playroom or expanding my child's point of view, I think that one is, as parents, I think the conversation is pretty loud and clear nowadays. You cannot be on any form of social media or anywhere not to know that diversity and inclusion is something that we need to start addressing at a very early age. There are enough, you like just Google it, resources for diversity and inclusion, and you'll get a whole list of books, picture books, starting from babies upwards to teenagers, actual books that you can kind of read, where to get them, you can pick them up. I think not just restricting it to books, even games, dolls, all kinds of representation. I think children absorb media on all fronts. So I think, like Simone was talking about earlier, it's about making informed choices. It's just about being a bit aware of what is the content that I want my child to consume. And it's literally having that little switch turned on when you're renting a movie to watch, when you're going to the library and picking a book, asking yourself, what is the gaps in my life? And I think this is where parents need to be a little bit more introspective, because there's a lot of conditioning that happens, right? We all grew up in different environments. If, say, for example, based in India, like Denise was saying, we grew up with a colonial past. So we have a lot of British influences in our literature, in our media, in terms of what we consume. And as a parent, if I'm aware of that, I know then what are my implicit biases that I'm passing on to my child. And therefore, I make that little added effort to bring in the other voices, bring in the other points of thought. So diversify the bookshelf, go out and look for those books and games and things that, would offer my child a different perspective.
Okay, I was actually about to ask Simone a question, but I can ask Denise instead. So, oh, there you are, she's back. So Akhila mentioned something about, intentionally going out and sparking that switch. So that made me think of something else, Simone. So you work in the diversity and inclusion sector. How do you make people actually turn that switch on? So, we're all in the industry, so to speak, and, we're trying to be intentional by default, but there are a lot of mums and dads and parents and caregivers out there who just go about their day. They're trying to keep up. They're trying to keep their child fed. They're doing 2 jobs. So what are sort of the tips and tricks, Simone and Denise, add on, please, that you can, sort of trickle this down to everybody?
Well, I think, you can't avoid this topic right now. Back to what Akhila was saying, you turn on the television, there's conversation around it. You're in the supermarket, there's conversation, whether it's on the magazines or media, the representation is very different. So wherever you turn, it's different. And even education now, what the curriculum is, it's being more informed by diversity, equity, and inclusion. Social media, it's there. So you can put your head in a box and try to avoid it, but that's not the right thing to do. So the best thing to do is to start educating yourself. Maybe if you don't have a lot of time, it's consuming a podcast or it's picking up a book. I think don't try to fire hose yourself. There is so much information. There are so many free webinars, all these things going on that you can get exhausted by trying to catch up. And so start small, consume in the way that feels right to you, know your learning style and what is going to work, and be intentional. Make an effort to watch something different. If you think about Netflix, they've done an amazing job about categorization of representation. So if you want to watch something on a women's perspective, there's a labeling that you can have. So I think working on yourself as a parent first, and then imparting that knowledge to your child, you will find that you will become more intentional about selections for what movie, even engaging from a PTA and showing up. I read for Black History Month. We zoomed into my daughter's school and we picked a book and we read to the class. So you can start small and engage to inform your child.
Hey, thanks. Denise, do you feel the same vibe in Asia? Do you feel that people are aware and it can't be avoided, this topic, and everyone's intentional?
I think our customers are. I think our customers have always been very careful and thoughtful in what they're purchasing. for their kids. Our customers are also very aware that, the things that they enjoyed as children or they had consumed as children are not the things that their children these days might enjoy. So that already allows a kind of difference and a diversity, or a deeper breadth in what's being consumed by their kids or what they purchase for the kids to consume. So that's already different. I think sometimes I really worry for the parents, and I think the parents listening to this probably share the same kind of anxiety, because you want the best for your children, you want to raise them to be good people in a society, so you're just trying to gather as much things as you can, and sometimes that's a lot for parents to take in. I think parents have an instinct as to what works best for their families, what kinds of conversations can work best for their children. They should be very aware that there are lots of resources available should they seek them. But we should really relax, The parents have a lot on their plate. And I think Singaporean parents are really worried about grades, maybe not just Singaporean parents. They're really worried about grades, right? You're worried about grades, you're worried about your social standing, which secondary school the primary school kids are going to go to, which primary school the preschool kids are going to go to. So a kid benefits from a happy, relaxed parent more than anything else. So when a parent is happy and relaxed, they have the space and the confidence to have conversations with their kids and to seek out different sources of information too. So yeah, I think I've gone off on a tangent a bit. I just really wanted to reassure parents because I feel so bad for them.
I think the conversation is about, in Asia especially, not just Asia, a lot of the world is about moving towards raising a more holistic, balanced child, right? Like a child with a worldview, a child who's empathetic. I think those conversations are coming into every part of the world, and I think that's probably the most important thing.
Also, the other thing to add is we can seek all sorts of information, read all kinds of books, have a really diverse bookshelf. But if our lives do not reflect that, if we do not go out and seek those experiences that will allow our children to have what we're calling diverse and inclusive experiences, then all this reading and all this listening to podcasts is for nothing if we do not live that lives also.
Yeah. I think that's such a great topic. On that note, Akhila and Simone, maybe Akhila can start with you. What is sort of your parting words of advice for a parent who's raising their child anywhere in this world?
So I think that what I would say would be that basically you're in this for a long run, right? Your diversity is not a one-time conversation. It's not one book on a bookshelf. It's something like Denise was saying, that's part of your life, and it's something diversity exists. It's a fact, right? And the point is that what we want to do is to raise our children to be more inclusive, right? And therefore, even if we can make one change, one conversation, one action, one extra kind of point of view, and just that little by little by little, but stay the course. Keep heading in that direction. I think it's the journey rather than the destination. It's the intention that's important. So be kind to yourself, but stay on that journey.
Thank you. Simone, any parting words for parents raising kids in this multicultural world?
Yeah, I'm echoing the give yourself grace, be nice to yourself, because, there's a lot to know and it can be really overwhelming. So I go back to what Denise was saying, know that there are resources available, even if you make it light, to change what you eat, to change where you go on vacation, diversify that, to change what you watch, or to broaden the spectrum of what you're watching. Those are also actions that you're taking to build your cultural competency. So even on social media, there are many things. Here we read, Asian Lit. There's so many different social media outlets. I find a lot of it on Instagram for this conversation that we're talking about, that you can follow PBS for kids and the offerings that they have, it's there. And so I go back to what Akila is saying, which is to just start and be nice to yourself on the journey. Don't make it not fun for you and also for your child. Infuse some fun on this journey because it can be fun.
Thank you. Denise, any last words from you?
Well, I think it's really a journey, this entire thing, as both of Akila and Simone has said. It is really a journey, and it's not about, you cannot feel better about yourself just by removing 2 or 3 titles from a Dr. Seuss, of the Dr. Seuss books from your bookshelf. You cannot feel better with just having 1 or 2 different own voices books on your bookshelf. It is a constant seeking and talking and adjusting that you really do have to go on. But of course, you go at your own speed and you seek the things that are comfortable, but also slightly uncomfortable. But don't push yourself too much. But you have to, like, I think people have to understand, teachers, educators and parents have to understand, it's not just removing a book from a bookshelf. It's not just not teaching a book. It's not just censoring a book from a book list. It's a lot more than that. It takes a bit more effort, but it is possible, and we can continue to be kind to ourselves and everyone else on this sometimes uncomfortable journey.
Very, very well said. On that note, thank you so much, Simone, Denise, Akila. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure this will be helpful to many parents like myself and a lot of our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me just